All right, everybody, welcome back to the show. Today, we're doing something a little bit different. For the next 2 weeks, we're going to be taking a break from our regularly scheduled interviews. So, as you know, we have a new one every week, but we're going to change things up a bit. The episode you'll be hearing today is an old episode I recorded almost 2 years ago of a gentleman in the church I grew up in. His name is Mr. James Adams. He was 90, I believe 90 years old at the time. And he is a man full of wisdom. He's a historian. He's actually a professor. He was a professor at the University of Auburn, and that's all stuff we get into and talk about. So, I know it's on the longer end of episodes, but I promise you it is all worth it. And I hope you enjoy our conversation as much as I did. But after these 2 weeks, we will be back with new interviews, as always, back to our regularly scheduled programming, if you will. So I hope you enjoy this different conversation. This was, again, 2 years ago, so my interview style has changed a little bit, and hopefully I've improved since then. So give me a little grace if I don't do the best job at asking questions. But yes, I hope you enjoy the episode. This is exclusively audio only. I did not video this back then, and so it'll just be audio, but it'll still be available on all platforms that you listen to. So be sure to listen to it. Please don't skip it because it's not a new interview. I promise it's just as good as any of the other ones. So without further ado, welcome to the show, my friend, a wise, wise man with many years of wisdom, Mr. James Adams. All right, Mr. James. I want to, before we get started, I want to thank you for the opportunity to come interview you. This is, like I said earlier, this is something I've been wanting to do for a long time, and I'm honored that I can.
Well, I feel gratified that you wanted to do it.
Yes, sir.
That you thought I might have anything to say that you'd be interested in.
But before we get started, I want to give you a little gift as a thank you for being on the show. So.
Oh. Should I look at the gift now?
You can go ahead and open it, yes, sir.
Okay.
Let's see if it's something.
Oh, look, cookies.
It's a banana nut muffin from our local coffee shop here in Zebulon.
Okay,
So
that's nice.
I didn't know if it's something you may enjoy, but
not only might I enjoy it, I guess Carolyn would help me enjoy it.
Yes, sir. Good. Glad.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I appreciate you. You didn't really have to do that, but I thank you.
That's something I want to start doing. Thanking all my as a little thank you for all my guests that come on my show. So, Mr. James, I know a little bit about you from knowing you for a couple years that we've been going to the church together.
More years than that, really, yeah.
Yes, sir. I think we've been going for...
Well, y'all started back when Ryan was here, didn't you?
Yes, sir, we did.
And I was here then.
So 14, 15 years, something around there.
Yeah, close to that.
Yes, sir. So I'm hoping through this podcast that I can learn more about you.
Okay.
So without further ado, where did you grow up?
I grew up right here in Pike County. Actually, was born in Meansville, and I've lived in the Meansville vicinity all my life, except the years that I was away in a career, my teaching career and so on, and also working career. But I was born in Meansville and have lived in my years here, growing in the Meansville vicinity all the time. This is the farthest away I've been. I was born right in the little town of Meansville.
Okay. So where did you go to school while you were
I
living
went
in
to school
Meansville?
up to the sixth grade in Meansville. Meansville at that time had what you may not be aware of. I graduated from 11th grade school. Pike County schools had graduated only had 11 grades. Most other high schools did then, and I graduated from the last 11th grade high school in Pike County. But before that, up into the sixth grade, I went to school in Meansville. Meansville had a school with 9 grades, and it burned. The school burned when I was in sixth grade, and we were diverted over to Concord. Those of us who were in, I believe, the last 2 grades, sixth and seventh, to Concord for the sixth and seventh grades. So after I got finished the seventh grade, the high school for Meansville was in Zebulon. So I went to the high school then and graduated from high school in Zebulon in 1950, the last 11th grade graduation.
And where was that school at? Where was that school located at?
It was well, yeah, you live up there on Old Meansville Road. Just come on down into Meansville, and when you get into Meansville, the first road to the left, a little farther out, is called Chapman Road. I can't remember what's named right there in Meansville. You turn on it or not. But just a little distance up there, about less than half a mile up the road, was where the school building was, and they rebuilt it. They rebuilt the school building in the same location after it burned, but not in time for me to go back there.
Yeah. Do you know how long that school was operational for? How much longer it operated?
The one that burned?
Yes, sir.
I believe that school was built in the early 20s, maybe. It wasn't brand new, but it was it was a nice school, but didn't have a lot of the conveniences that they would have these days because they just weren't available. For instance, the heat system was big furnaces in the basement. The heat they fired by coal, and the heat would go up into drafts, radiators that were up near the ceiling that they would open in the wintertime for the heat to come out. It didn't always give you as much heat as you wanted.
So did y'all, with those furnaces, did y'all have to keep wood on them, or did y'all burn coal?
Burned coal. They burned coal, yeah. You'd have to fire them just like you're building a fire in a pot-bellied stove or something. You use kindling stuff to get it started, and then keep it going with coal as long as you were using it, Mm-hmm. And we had a janitor at the school who spent a lot of his time in the basement checking, firing the furnace, that kind of stuff.
What were some things y'all did for fun while you were in school when you were younger?
In school or just fun in general?
Just in general.
Okay. Well, we lived 6 miles. Not 6 miles. We lived out of we lived in the rural area outside of Meansville, which we didn't have electric lights. We didn't get electricity till I was 8 or 10, between 10 and 12 years old. And but fun things were more primitive type things. We'd play in the streams. My dad had a farm with 2 or 3 good streams on it. We'd build dams, and there were no lakes around us back in those days. We're talking about back in the late 30s and early 40s. Weren't any lakes, so we would go down those streams and build dams and make our own, what we call them, a wash hole, and play in them and swim in them, that sort of thing. And we had cousins that lived up the road from us. We'd get together and play ball. We'd ride bicycles and build brush arbor tents. In the wintertime, we built one time and put a fire in it, and it burned down. But just more primitive home type activities, right?
A lot of outdoor stuff.
Almost entirely outdoor, yeah.
Sir, that's neat. what? Let's backtrack real quick and to when you were first born, and now when were you born?
I was born in 1933, August the 11th. Just recently had my 90th birthday.
Wow, that's awesome. That's amazing.
I give you an interesting little side. Franklin Roosevelt, president, had just become the president in his first term when I was born. Early that year, he'd been inaugurated as president. If he had lived through his fourth term, I would have been 16 years old before I ever knew another president. He was elected 4 terms because during the time he was the president, we had World War II.
Right.
So we didn't change presidents, and I don't recall if there was any precedent then to keep him from running again. So he ran for his 4th term, and he died in 1945, the same year the war ended.
Wow.
World War II ended.
That's interesting. I never knew that because I thought president can only serve for 2 terms. 2 terms or 2 terms of 4 years for a total of
4
8
years each. Yeah,
for a total of 8.
I think that became a firm precedent after a requirement after that, but I wouldn't be sure about that because the war came about, World War II. The threat from it might be a part something I could mention somewhere else here, but when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, that just triggered everything in 1941. We went to war, and so we didn't change presidents until he had already been elected for his 4th term, and he died in office. Died over at Warm Springs at his little White House.
That's right. That's right. So World War II kind of prevented him from anyone else taking over a presidency because they were in the midst of that turmoil.
Yeah, I know nobody. I don't recall whether anybody ran against him. I think he did have some opposition, but nobody. He was he came in with quite a support, a bang, so to speak. He was a Democrat back in those days. The Democrats were the more conservative party.
That's what I've heard.
Yeah, it was. But he brought about a lot of the social welfare stuff, a little more liberal policies that we never thought we'd ever see. Mm-hmm. And some of them were just wonderful. Some of them went way beyond what was necessary, set in motion his big welfare state. But one of the main things he did, to his credit, he electrified the country, the rural areas. We didn't have electricity. He'd been in office several years, and all the rural areas had electricity. And you couldn't utilize refrigerators, well pumps, not even electric lights. And he saw that we had that we started the first electric membership corporation right here in Barnesville, Georgia, was where they and he came there personally to help inaugurate it.
Right here in Barnesville?
Yeah, right here in Barnesville.
He came to Barnesville.
He came to Barnesville, right.
Do you remember?
Well, I wasn't. Yeah, I was a child, a small child, but of course I was smaller. I wasn't there.
Yes, sir.
But it was a big rally in Barnesville with his being there, and some of the state senators, representatives, and so on were there, and obviously because the president was there.
Wow, it seems like he did a lot of good for our country in the time that he served.
Did a lot of good, yeah. As I said, he also set in motion what we consider this major welfare state that just kept rolling and rolling. Today, it's a big giveaway for nearly about everybody who don't want to work,
Right. Yeah, it's very unfortunate that it's come to that.
Yeah.
So let's go back to your childhood, Mr. James, and what did you dream of becoming when you were a boy? What was that dream?
Well, since I was born and raised in a rural area in the country, my opportunities were fairly limited in terms of what I realized would be available. I probably felt like that the most desirable thing for me would be some sort of agriculture-related career, whether it be just exactly farming or what. But I couldn't conceive of anything virtually that would fit my inclinations and so on, because I was raised up in the country that way, that wasn't agriculturally related. Never thought about what actually developed in my later years when I had the opportunity to get education, that sort of thing.
So you thought you were going to have to go into an agriculture career.
Well, I thought that's what would be most fitting, what was available, and what I was more targeted for.
Yeah. And is that what most people
And
did?
where most of my opportunities might be.
Okay. Is that what most people did around these parts? Was
Yeah.
agriculture?
Oh yeah, nearly everybody were farmers in those days. We're talking about in the 30s and on into the 40s. This was almost entirely a farm population, except in some of the cities, and Pike County didn't have any large cities. We just had Meansville was quite a much bigger place then than it is now, and none of the others places in Pike County, like Zebulon was a little bit bigger. It was the county seat. Zebulon, Meansville at that point had several industries. Had a canning operation that went through several seasons in the year. Had a pecan processing factory there. That people were employed in all those situations down it's certain seasons of the year. And of course, along with most every small town, it had a sizable agriculture-related operation of ginning, cotton ginning, fertilizer distribution, that kind of stuff. No, of no avail these days, of course.
So cotton was the big crop around here?
Yeah, the major crop. Cotton began to give way somewhat to. We became one of the few places at one point in the late 30s and only in the 40s to produce pimento peppers. And the canning operation, the owners of the cannery was Meansville, and there was a cannery in Zebulon, a cannery in Concord. All these places canned pimento peppers, they canned turnip greens, they canned peas, they canned peaches at different, so it kept them occupied at a pretty good length of time in the summer and fall. But the canning operators would extend farmers' contracts. They would sign a contract to plant and harvest so many acres of pimento peppers. And the cannery, and when you signed that contract, they guaranteed you that they would take all that you produced on it, which they did. So we did that for several years when I was growing up. That was harder than cotton. Cotton is light and easy to pick. I mean, not so easy to pick, but easy to handle, like in the field. Peppers like picking a bunch of bags of tomatoes all the time or something. You couldn't go far. You had to empty again. Get relieved of it.
So did you ever have to, like, were you ever in the fields and picking cotton or peppers? And
I did those. We did those, all those things. We grew cotton at times. We didn't grow as much cotton. My dad, after the war began, and there was a great demand for employees because so many of the younger men were being drafted into service. And he took a position with the textile plant over there in Thomaston for a while, but we continued the farming operations. But we didn't grow as much cotton then, but up to that point, he'd had tenant farmers that also, my brother and I were large and big enough to do a lot of the work on the farm. He had tenant farmers working on the place. And but about the time that the war started and so on, and he went over took the job at a textile plant in Thomaston, as well, and we were big enough. He started using us to do the farm work, and we planted less cotton because that required a good bit of labor to pick. You had to harvest it by hand. These days, anybody that grows cotton have to grow it on fairly large scale, so you can use these mechanical cotton pickers. Back then you didn't see one pick cotton by hand. You hired cotton pickers if you and as well as engaging it yourself. So after my dad was leaving it sort of more into for us to work at the fields, while he was doing work at home at a plant in Thomaston, we pretty well minimized the cotton because it took so much more labor. And he'd get the contracts, acreage contracts, with the cannery to produce so many acres of pimento peppers. As I said, that was a very burdensome thing to harvest. But you had to pick. It's like growing tomatoes. You had to, or something like that. You had to pick the peppers every week. Every week, we'd come like even on, and it extended on, and usually into about October, till almost frost. Those pepper plants would continue to produce peppers, and we'd have to you'd spend our Saturdays, nearly every Saturday, picking those peppers and bagging them up. My dad would be home to help us usually on Saturdays, most of the time, and my brother and I would haul them in a 2-horse wagon over to the cannery on Monday, usually the following Monday.
So y'all didn't have a car to take them over there? Y'all did horse and wagon?
Yeah.
Wow.
We had a car, but not a truck.
Okay.
Most farmers around didn't have pickup trucks back then.
So horses and wagons were still used.
Mules mainly, mules and wagons.
Okay.
Right. We had a mule team, and we'd drive the mules over to the cannery in Meansville. And from my place over here, it was across the mountain. Had to cross a mountain to get to it. But still in the vicinity of Meansville. As I said, I was born in Meansville, and then until after I started school, we lived right down 109, about a mile below Meansville, where Pine Valley Road comes into 109.
Yes, sir.
We lived right there in that particular place where the Pine Valley Road ends there with it and comes into 109. But we didn't. Then we moved from there. My dad bought this property over here. It was abandoned sort of acreage. Had been a peach orchard, big peach orchard there. But before pimento peppers, this area was a big peach producing area. There were a lot of peach orchards through here. That whole farm, then where I grew up late after we moved from 109, there were some peach trees around around the fields on the terraces and so on. From where they had once been a peach orchard.
That's very interesting. I've lived in Pike County most of my whole life, and I never knew that Pike had the type of industry that you've been describing to me, and the magnitude of farming that they did have.
Well, the people that operated the peach orchard, where my dad later we moved, and it had already been abandoned. They'd pulled up both the peach trees, but it was known as Echo Mountain Peach Farm, owned by the Gill and Collier. Mr. Gill, who was the grandfather of a family right over here on Pine Valley Road. One of his sons settled over there and raised his family. One of his sons who still lives there. One old Mr. Gill who owned the peach farm, which his grandson still lives there, over there. But he lived on Chapman Road, just going out of Meansville, north. I told you about where the school used to be located.
Yes.
A little farther over, probably no more than half a mile over, was where Mr. Gill lived. And Collier also lived in Meansville. And they operated that peach farm. In fact, my dad's barn was a big, nice barn, 2-story barn, and it had been built as a peach packing shed when there was peach orchard there. And he adapted it to his farm operations.
How about that? So going back to, I know you touched on it a little bit earlier, but the amenities. What sort of amenities did y'all have back then, such as electricity, AC, and how has that changed from what y'all had now to what we have?
Well, that was the real transformation of our rural society when electricity came. Up until we had electricity, none of those things were available. None of those amenities were available. We didn't have air conditioning. We couldn't even operate fans. We didn't have electric lights. But I can remember when electricity first came, we first had electric light. That was after that was in the early 1930s, about the same, close to the time the World War II started, early 40s, when electrification pretty much came to the rural areas around here. And this was, as I understand it, one of the first electrification membership corporations in the country. Was that when President Roosevelt came to inaugurate in Barnesville.
Okay.
And I think that must have been about 1938 or 9. But before they got electric lines set up and poles and all that stuff, we were in the early 40s.
Wow.
Before we got electricity. And so one of the first things when we finally got electricity, and that was, you can credit pretty much Roosevelt with that. One of the first things my mother got was a refrigerator. And the next thing we got was a pump in the well, pump water. And then was able after that to get a bathroom, indoor bathroom.
Indoor plumbing and all
Indoor
that.
plumbing, yeah.
Wow.
And I was well able to remember all that. I was a good sized boy in my not quite a teenager. I was probably 10, 12, about 10 years old or so before we got those amenities.
So did y'all used to have to bring up water by hand from the well?
Oh yeah, we had a well with a windlass. Had to draw it by hand. Even had to draw it for the mules. It had to be watered, that sort of thing. And in the summertime, if you wanted water to take a shower or a bath, they didn't have anything for showers. We had a big wash tub. When I saw a wash tub, we've seen these big tubs like that out in the backyard, and we'd put water in it, draw the water out of the well, and let the sun warm it, have a warm bath.
So y'all didn't have a water heater. Y'all had to let the sun warm it so y'all'd have that warm bath.
Yeah, well, we wouldn't have had any way to have a water heater until we had electricity.
Okay. Wow. Wow. Man, times really have changed from...
Oh, yeah. I think that within my lifetime, with the effect of the war, and that's something else you can pursue, how the World War II transformed technology and so on. It imposed the need for technology that became then adapted to civilian society. I think in my lifetime, I can't imagine in my dad's life before that, anything that changed society, or even my grandfather back, except maybe the coming of automobiles. In my grandfather's early day, my daddy was only a kid when the first automobiles came. But there would have been nothing that would have transformed their lives like was able to experience when we had no electricity. Things weren't much different than they'd been in the generation before, several generations before.
But the change was drastic.
We read by oil lamps, kerosene lamps at night. The technology that they had better technology in lamp design than they have now. They have what they call Aladdin lamps. They would give you equivalent to about a 40 watt bulb. It was the best light you could get, but with a lamp using kerosene oil. Mm-hmm.
Wow. Wow. So, Mr. James, let's go back to, we mentioned it, World War II. How old were you when the war began?
In 1941, we did war. Roosevelt declared war following the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor in December the 7th, 1941. we used to have quite an observance of Pearl Harbor Day in this country. But now we got so many woke types and so on that they want to forget all that kind of stuff. But when the Japanese attacked attacked our fleet in Pearl Harbor, the president declared war immediately. That was in 1941. I was 8 years old.
And do you remember that attack and the commotion of the country?
Yeah, I do. I mean, communications were not what they are today. When I said we didn't have electricity yet, that means we didn't even have a radio. There were battery radios that people beyond the local towns local towns mostly had electricity in the town. But in the rural areas, which were maybe not far out of like Meansville or whatever, you didn't have electricity. But there was radio technology with batteries, and I can't remember whether we ever had a battery radio or not. I had an uncle, though, who was really avid type to keep up with news and the war news and all that. I remember he had a battery-powered radio. But in fact, television came not long after we even had electricity for radios.
Mm-hmm. So when did y'all eventually get the radio?
Oh, I can't tell you exactly the time, but obviously after we had electricity, sometime in the 40s, I know.
During the war or after?
It might have been during the war, because the war didn't end until 1945, and we had electricity before that time. I would think we had a radio in the mid 40s, and we, as I said, if we could have, that was because of the Electric Membership Corporation being established, the first one right here in Barnesville, and you could have a radio before that, as I said, with a battery radio. If you didn't have electricity, which we weren't any worse off than most everybody else, unless you lived in just the limited areas like in the towns that had electrical service.
What sort of things did y'all listen to, like on the radio? Were there certain shows, any music?
Yeah, there was music. There were comedy shows, like you probably never heard of some, like Amos and Andy. I've got my son Dave that we lost, who died. He gave me the complete all the Amos and Andy shows. There were two black guys that were real comedians, and it was real comedy. That is The Life of Riley. Some of these wouldn't even register something you ever heard of before, but you had quite a number of comedy type shows on radios in those days. There was no television then. And I remember we would come in. My dad got a charge out of some of those comedy type shows. Sometimes if he was close by in the house, we was out around the yard or something. If they knew what one to come on, we'd come in and listen to it for about 30 minutes or something,
I think the oldest radio show that I know of is the Ed Sullivan Show.
The what show?
The Ed Sullivan Show.
Oh, Ed Sullivan, yeah.
Do you remember that one?
I remember Ed Sullivan mostly on TV. I can't remember whether we ever listened to him on radio or not.
That's right. He was on TV.
Yeah.
I forgot. I don't know if he was ever on radio, but
yeah, he probably wasn't, because, like as I said, I mainly remember Ed Sullivan on TV.
So, going back to World War II, what was the state of the country when the war began?
But when the war began, we were still trying to come out of depression. See, we haven't had anything like that since Levi. This was the greatest depression. In fact, it's generally referred to now as the Great Depression. It began in 1920 with a big stock market crash in 1929, and Herbert Hoover was president, and he's been blamed for the depression in effect. But I don't think he could be. He was a Republican. I don't think he could be blamed for it necessarily. I don't think he could be blamed for the stock market crash and all that. And when Roosevelt came in 1933, that year I was born, we were in a sad state in this country. We were we were in the depths of a depression, and there were farm boys, most of the families, rural areas. The boys had the only alternative they had was just continuing to work on the farm, and that's continued. Some with some improvement under Roosevelt, but when Pearl Harbor came, 1941, we still were trying to come out of the Depression. In fact, I think I should recall this statistic. In 1938 or 9, when I was about 5 or 6 years old, unemployment in this country was up around close to 20%. And most of it was most boys had no alternative much but the farm.
Wow.
And to stay on the farm. But the war effort just remarkably changed all that. Immediately, Roosevelt had to install all necessary measures for the war effort, material supplies, and most of the young men were drafted. So that if you could walk around and stand up pretty good, you could probably get a job somewhere around home, like in a textile mill. We had the main industries in this area then were textiles. Every town around us had textile mills. Thomaston was one of the biggest, had the big B.F. Goodrich mill there. They called it the Martha Mills. And they had a couple of other textile mills. Barnesville had a couple that produced tie cord, which was very important during the war. All these vehicles that they had to operate with in the war effort obviously had to have tires and tie cord. In fact, this produced a real shortage. I remember the shortages we in civilian life at home, growing up as a boy, was sustained. We had experience because of the war effort. You couldn't buy. We ceased producing automobiles between 1942 1946. Not a single automobile was produced. Everything was devoted to the war effort, and you could hardly buy a new tire. They devised this method of retreading the tires. Take a tire in and they put a retread it because you could hardly buy new tires. And it also affected some types of food supplies that were much in some considerable shortage. And in fact, so much so that some of them were rationed. Had rationing stamps to enable you to buy certain things. I think maybe one of them applied with gasoline. I'm not quite sure, but gasoline was one, obviously, of item of great demand because of its necessity and use in the war effort. And I remember to facilitate the war effort, people were urged to bring their scrap iron. And the place here in locally to leave it was on the Meansville School's yard. And I remember we had a huge scrap iron pile that people were bringing in. It was going to be taken in and melted down, recast, for Army primarily for military purposes. Everything was geared up for a while to win in the war, and we saw a level of patriotism in this society, in this country, Levi, that we've never seen since. Today, our people are just not that patriotic anymore.
And why do you think that is?
Difference in value system. First, the effect of the church, religion. People there was just more morality, emphasis on morality the history of this country as being a Christian nation. Today, Obama told us several years ago that we were no longer a Christian nation. He made that clear not only this country, but in his involvement with some of the European nations. He wanted them to be clear, to know that that America was not a Christian nation anymore. So, and it certainly has affected. I mean, there's been a vast change with the increase in technology that resulted from the war effort. People came, survivors from the war came home, and they really didn't have to go back to the farms. There was industry. Industry had been burgeoning over that period of time. This is through the 1940s mainly, and they came home. They could get jobs in industry, various types of industrial type situations. The farm economy, strict farm economy, pretty well was displaced as a result of particularly the aftermath of World War II. Following that, rural areas were devoted more to cattle, pasturage, and stuff like that. I guess you could travel all the roads in Pike County, and you'd never see a field of cotton. The pimento pepper thing was a phase for a few years. Somehow it went away after several years. Went away, and almost all those canneries closed. So it was a transformation of our society from an economic as well as of a value in terms of a value system that went along with the increase in technology.
What was the dynamic like among the community? Such as were you close to your neighbors? Were you?
Yeah, for one thing, you didn't have near as many neighbors as you have now. I mean, I go up the road. You know where John Mixon lives up here?
Yes, sir.
Well, almost in front of him, there's a house sitting right fairly close to the road. That's where I grew up when we moved over here.
Oh, wow.
My daddy built that house, had it built. It was an old house there where he bought a sizable acreage there, about 126 acres. And it had an old house on it. So after maybe 4 or 5 years or whatever, he was able to we tore it down, and I remember that very well, helping tear the old one down and had the new one built. But anyway, and further answer your question, today there are, I think it's actually 10 houses on that property, that 126 acres that my dad owned, right there. John Mixon, his daughter. John has a rental house across. You can't see it in the trees right across from our old house there. Ronald has his house. Danny Petty, the house that he lives in, it's just opposite the drive that you turn to go out to John Mixon's house. And then Ben Adams, he took Ryan's house, bought the house that Ryan Amy used to live in.
Mm-hmm.
And the next house beyond that is where Ben's dad used to live. He still owns it. He's a school administrator, in Milledgeville.
Yes, sir.
And I suppose he thinks he's going to be able to retire soon enough years to come back there. But he keeps it rented out. But anyways, I mentioned all those houses were not there. Mm. You could go from up the road here above the old church. Where do you realize that there was a railroad there? That's the gap. That's where the gap is. Where the term arose, they called it Mountain Gap. There was a natural gap there, and the railroad built that rail line through the gap. But anyway, you cross that gap. Well, there used to be a big railroad bridge, wooden bridge there. And from that point on up, there was one house on the left. Then there was not another house till you get up there where I told you that I grew up. It was two. Ronald's house was not there. There was not another house. My dad did have a little house built for tenant farmers right out by, not far away from the house. But then there was not another house. So you got up to where you turned to go to across the mountain to Meansville. And my grandfather, the next house up was about a half a mile up the road from there. My grandfather Brown, my mother's father and parents that lived there, that was the next house of any consequence. I think there might have been a little tenant house that farmers back in those days built these smaller houses for tenant farmers to live in. But for the mile or so up the road, there were about 2 or 3 houses. Now there are about 10 houses on that one piece of property that my dad owned.
Well, I'm curious to know. I was asking that question because now, we have people, we're a lot closer together.
Yeah.
Houses are built a lot closer together, like you were saying. And I think it's sad that I can go my whole life and I'll never meet the neighbor that
Yeah.
lives right across from me, and we'll never have like that.
Back then, we really knew our neighbors, and they were farther away.
Yeah.
If you come down this way from that, what I said, there was old railroad cut up there, where that's actually the true physiographical gap. That's why they got the name Gap. You come down here, the only house was type of buildings were the church, old church here, and the dining hall for the campus ground, the tabernacle on that side. There was one house right here, was built here in my lifetime, and then there wasn't another one. No, yeah, but when I was growing up, there wasn't another one till you got down to Vega Road.
Mm-hmm. Why do you think that's changed from, you being so close to your neighbors to now, we don't really even know them and they go about their own life? And why do you think that changed?
Well, because most of the time the neighbors were either kin, family connections, or they were old families that had known each other. My parents had known them for years. Now, most of this development is newer people that come in. You never, hardly ever have any reason to know them.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I got a neighbor, my next door neighbor, on the same side of the road as I live on. Next door neighbor down there. I don't even know his name. He's been there now 2 or 3 years, I guess it is, and he one of his neighbors across the road from him reported him for shooting deer on my property, and he came up to see me about it, and I think they threatened to get the game warden on him, and I told him, I said, well, I'm not going to call the game warden, but I said, I didn't. I said I wasn't the one that reported you. But I said I would prefer you not shooting on, I got horses down that pasture.
Yes, sir. Yeah. Yeah. So let's backtrack to World War II again. How was the country different after the war?
Well, as I said, there was a technological revolution that resulted from the war effort, in effect. In other words, the war placed its necessities on our nation to advance technology and so on. So much of the productive activity in the nation was developed for the war effort. Some of it would not have been existing before, the type of technology and so on we had, and the advance of automobiles. The automobiles were first produced, invented back in about the first decade or so of 1900. But there weren't that many automobiles on the road. People, when I was growing up, most families had one car, and not a truck either. So the advance in the war effort brought us up to a point of necessitating a production effort in this country that we hadn't had to deal with before and hadn't needed before. And as I said, guys coming back home from war from World War II, found that it was much more industrial type development to utilize their skills for employment than they had been before the war. It had a transforming effect on our society, in effect from an economic standpoint, particularly, as well as from a more civilian, people relationship, that sort of thing.
Did you know any guys around this area that served that returned home after the war?
Well, I know some that didn't return home. Our next door neighbor, we go up there, as I said, past the gap. My dad's house was the next house on the right, but before you get there was one house on the left, the Matthews home. They were an old family, and they had a son named Joel Matthews. He went in service and was missing in action, had never been found. And then when I was in grammar school at that time in Meansville, when the war started, and like when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor and so on, and immediately there was a vast patriotic response. So I can cite several guys who were older than I in school at Meansville. When I was just in the early grades, they were old enough to go in service. Some of them didn't come back home. One was Calvin Gooden. They lived over. His family lived in Meansville. Had before that lived down on farther down on 109. I had some relatives that came back. They didn't get killed in service. One first cousin, Cochran, young man, Chancellor Cochran. I had I was trying to think some of the others. Oh yeah, I had a first cousin, another first cousin, Adams, Benjamin Adams. He came back from service, but they were, that was a typical situation. Some of them came back, some of them didn't.
Do you remember the day that we had victory in Europe, that we won the war in Europe?
Yeah, it was. I can't cite the day. In fact, we had a VJ Day also, victory over Japan. Both of those occurred before by 1945. 45 was the last one. That's when the war was won, in effect, over Europe, particularly in Germany and that sort of thing. And we had not too long before that, and I can't cite the actual dates. We had VJ Day, victory over Japan.
So was there a big celebration in this area when the war was won?
Well, we didn't have the communication, mass communication means we have today, but there was a sigh of relief and some expressions of gratitude and pleasure, being pleased that this was over. I don't remember there being any kind of big rally of any sort, like in the county, at the county seat or something like that, because at that point in time we didn't have many of the some of the mass means for doing it we do now.
Mr. James, let's move on to your career. And what was your first job, and what did that job teach you?
The first job I ever had, there was an official payroll situation outside of home. When I was growing up, we'd do little jobs with neighbors. They'd pay us a few cents, that kind of, pay us a little money, that kind of thing, back when we were kids. But right after I graduated from high school in 1950, I got a job. I told you a minute ago that most of these towns in the county that back then had canneries, for canning vegetables and pimento peppers and turnip greens, and so and they would be very busy in the fall, late summer and fall. And I got after graduating from high school, I got a job in the canteen of this cannery over at Mainsville, assisting the operator of the canteen with serving customers at the cash register, and also keeping up the things that had to be done to keep the place in order. But back then, Coke bottles and so on, we'd have to get them together, pick them up. Just whatever that I needed to do in this canteen situation. That was my first job, first payroll job.
Do you remember what they paid you for that?
No, I don't. I don't know. It wasn't anything like what it would be these days. It was an hourly rate, and I can't remember what it was an hour. But as I said, it would have been minuscule when you look at what's happening in our society today. And it was the first money that I had earned in an outside job situation. In fact, I used it, saved some money there, in order to go off to school later on.
And yeah, going into that, what career did you decide to pursue?
Well, I didn't really decide to pursue a career that early. As I mentioned earlier, I was raised on the farm in an agriculture type situation. I couldn't conceive of many opportunities that would be accessible, as far as I was concerned, that probably were not somehow agriculturally related. Thought it would probably, and I liked to be living on a farm, that sort of thing. I liked the openness of a farm life. If I didn't like all the hard work, mm-hmm. But I was probably I wasn't too as different maybe from a lot of young people. I wasn't too feverish about getting away from home, and because I didn't see these some of the what opportunities, I wasn't willing to get out and just leave home and risk whatever came up. But so I had thought that my probably main perspective, my main direction would be toward something that would be in a local relationship, agriculture related in some way. Didn't think about going off to a place like Atlanta, which is what happened. In other words, it was came about somewhat unexpectedly. I found that a family over here in Lipsy Springs, a young man that I went to school with, he's a little older than I was, he had, his mother had bought him a course, so he had bought it. Back then, you don't find these much these days, but back then, a place like Atlanta and towns of much size at all would have what they would call little business schools, not regular colleges, where they would teach people skills, like trained secretaries, to stenographers, and accountants to take accounting, that kind of stuff. So I bought a course in a little school in Atlanta called Southern Business College. It was not a college credit type thing, but they would teach you a skill, and it was supposed to be an accounting course that I was going to take there. So I bought it at a reduction because the guy that his mother, whoever bought it for him, he reneged. He didn't want to go. So we took it. So I went to Atlanta and got a boarding house, a place to board. The school handled that. They had other young men like me coming in at times, and they provided them would find a location for them to board. So I did. Didn't have a car. I rode a trolley, the old-fashioned electric trolleys with had the lines up overhead, into work every day. I mean, to school every day. And I took this course, and it was about a year. It was supposed to last about a year. So about the time I was ready to conclude it, not long before, the Southern Railway, it was now Norfolk Southern, they hired a good many of these people out of this course as management trainees, in a sense, to bring them in. And they didn't have a highly formal management training program back then, but they'd bring them in at some rather menial job with the intention of training them on the job. So I got accepted with Southern Railway for a job situation. And so I spent, let's see, that was in 1952.
How old were you when you went off to this business school?
33. It was 51. I was 17 when I went to, see, I graduated 16, and I was almost 17 when I graduated. So it was later on in the year, about the end of the year, that I got this situation with this little course in Atlanta. So I was in my 18th year, still 17 years old, when I did that. In fact, I wasn't old enough to have a birth certificate. Let's see. I didn't have a Social Security card. I had to get a Social Security card and that kind of thing. But I started this course, as I said, and finished it, and came close to finishing it in about a year. And it qualified me to go into one of those positions with the railroad. And the railroads back in those were extremely good, had good wage levels. I started out at a fairly low level in 52, and I stayed with the railroad until 62. Yeah, about a little over 10 years, enough that actually I qualified for railroad retirement.
Wow. What was your position on the railroad?
Well, I just started out, as I said, a rather menial position, and then they soon promoted me, put me on operating an accounting machine. It was in the accounting department of the railroad when I started out. Put me operating one of these big business machines. They can do all that stuff on computer these days. And so I got that, and then I finally found out, I don't remember how I found it, but out about it, the job that was available with the railroad still, and right there in Atlanta with the dining car department. Back then, the railroads operated a lot of passenger trains and dining cars, and every passenger train had a dining car on it. So I spent about, I think it was 4 years that I worked with with the dining car department. And then at the end of 4 years, the dining car department was virtually discontinued. And even just before it was, they had to reduce forces. So I still found another job with the railroad right there in Atlanta, the best job I'd ever had. I became the special assistant, so to speak, to the general freight traffic manager. And right in his office. Back then, railroads didn't hire women stenographers. If you, all their stenographers were men, and they trained them to serve one of the major officials. That was in effect your training program. After a while, they would move you up to a high level. So I'm in that at that level. I moved into what they call the management level of the firm, an accepted position where I didn't have to, wasn't required to belong to a union. And it was while I was there, let's see, I left in 62, that I finished my master's degree at Georgia State University entirely in evening school and study the field of economics. And so I decided they had indicated that they were going to be moving the entire department where I was working with the railroad to Washington, D.C. Back at that time, the Southern Railway's headquarters were in Washington, D.C. They moved them all, and they moved them later to Norfolk when they consolidated with Norfolk and Western to become the Norfolk Southern. And then just recently, they have moved the entire headquarters. My son is with them, my oldest son, to Atlanta. But anyway, building a brand new big building. It's not even where they used to be located, down on Spring Street in Atlanta. So at that juncture, when they had, with their headquarters still in Washington, my boss told me, he tried to dissuade me from leaving the railroad and going out. I had decided I would go and pursue further studies toward my doctor's degree. He tried to persuade me not to. He said, He said, you just tell me what you want on this railroad. And of course, he meant within a certain areas of type training and so on, or type. He said, I'll see that you get it. But I didn't. But if I did, the job would be in Washington, D.C. I didn't want to go to Washington, D.C. So that helped precipitate my effort and decision to discontinue with the railroad. And I was very fortunate to get a graduate fellowship with Georgia State University to study for my doctorate.
Yeah, you said that you did night school at Georgia State College to get your master's degree. When did you start doing that?
Starting with
night school, pursuing your master's.
Well, master's or bachelor's?
Which one did you get first?
Bachelor's. I started working on my bachelor's degree at Georgia State University in 1953, fall of 53.
While you were working for the railroad at the same time?
Yeah, while I was working for the railroad. And all the rest of my work until I got to the doctorate. I did it all at Georgia State. But until I got to the doctorate, through my bachelor's and master's, I got it in evening college while I was working full-time with the railroad. But when I decided I couldn't continue with the railroad, I didn't want to go to Washington, D.C., that I would make the break that I had an interest in and anticipated, and get into I found an opportunity. They accepted me for this graduate fellowship to study for my doctorate. That I thought I would like to go into academics and teach after having gotten my degree, which I did.
Okay. And where did you pursue your doctorates at? What university was that?
Georgia State.
Georgia State
University.
Okay, same university. And I know I've heard, and I don't know a lot about this. This is why I want to ask you about it. But you were at Auburn University. Was this after you got your doctorates and began teaching?
Yeah. Well, I left and started teaching short of the doctorate because all that remained, the main thing that remained, I got all of the coursework out of the way, but I didn't have the graduate fellowship to support the dissertation, and that's a doctoral dissertation, and I had to do a research study. I did an economic development study of 3 counties in Georgia. That of somewhat varying backgrounds and experiences, and so it took a while. I didn't get on, didn't immediately start it because I got the job with teaching at the University of Georgia as an ABD. They call it all but the dissertation, and the first thing I thought was I needed to prove that I could be a good teacher. So I spent most of my time. In the first year or two, I spent 3 years at Georgia, developing. And I was teaching one of the most difficult courses in the business administration, a bachelor's degree in the curriculum. One that the students dreaded most was economic statistics, and so that's what they mainly had me do in Georgia, mostly teaching economic statistics, statistical methods in economics. And I was not a mathematician, but it didn't have to be. With I managed with study to handle all the courses, the types of methods and so on, statistics, in my teaching that at Georgia. And then at the end of about 3 years, I had a friend that we'd studied together on our doctorates at Georgia State, and her field was economics like mine, and she Georgia at West Georgia College and State University at Carrollton. Then it was then just West Georgia College. They had just installed an economics department from the ground up. Well, at Georgia, I was right at the bottom of the list. There was an old department. Everybody in the department was older than I was, and we had more tenure and that kind of thing. So she called me and told me what was available there. Said that I could get in on the ground floor, so to speak, of an economics department. So I decided to go to West Georgia, and I went there and taught 3 years. And while I was there, toward the end of the third year, a friend of mine that we had taught together, he had a background similar to mine. He had worked with the railroad, and then he had a degree in economics. And we had got to know each other at Georgia when I was at Georgia. Well, after I went to West Georgia, toward the end of that year, the last year, he was a graduate, I think it is bachelor's degree of Auburn University. So he had some strong sentiments for Auburn, and they had offered him the opportunity to come there and establish a program, a degree in transportation economics. And he knew my background was virtually the same as his. I'd been in transportation, and then got a degree in economics. So he called me and asked me would I be interested in coming to Auburn. And I said, well, I'll come over and we'll talk about it, see what it's like, what it offers. So that was in 1969, and I went over and explored it, opportunities there and so on, that I would be working with him directly. And he later became my dean, which was much to my advantage. And I then later, after that, pretty much directed or coordinated the entire program. So I started there at Auburn in '69 and stayed there till I retired in '97.
Wow. So you were there from, do you say 67 to?
No, '69.
69 to
97.
97. Wow.
But of course, I didn't move away till '98, away from Auburn.
So you moved to Auburn.
Yeah.
When did you move there from?
In '69.
Okay.
Yeah, I moved when I couldn't have taught at Auburn, not have moved there, not from where I was living in Carrollton.
Okay.
Yeah, I sold my place in Carrollton, and we moved over there and bought a new home, newly built home there, and lived in the same location. It was a very nice neighborhood for the duration of our years there. And as I said, I retired in '67 with 29 years service. And we just, about the next year or soon after that, we started developing this place here for our retirement.
And y'all moved
and didn't
back.
move over here. See, in the interim, the first house we fixed for retirement burned.
Mm.
I don't know whether I told you that or not.
No, sir, you didn't.
Well, we had a cottage here, and we adapted it and expanded it and everything, and had it just about ready to move in. This was in the fall of '97, and lightning. They said we weren't here because we didn't have our place here to move yet, been able to move here yet. So we would come over and I was already retired. We'd make trips over and try to select things and so on. But they gave us a call one morning. It was in December I'll never forget it, December the 9th. Mrs. Coleman, who lived right over here then, called and said our house was on fire.
Hmm.
And so they determined the investigation, the insurance company, I believe, investigated one investigation, and I think maybe the state also did one. They all both concluded that it was lightning strike because there had been a thunderstorm the evening before, then December the 9th, and with some lightning and so on. And so that's the conclusion they drew, that it was a result of a lightning strike. And when I built this house, I had lightning rods put on it.
I'm sure. Yes, sir. So, you mentioned, you said y'all moved back here. Tell me about your wife, Miss Carolyn. Where did y'all meet and when did y'all get married?
Well, there's no beginning of that. I've known her all my life.
Oh, wow.
We've got a picture back at the old Mountain Gap Church, which was up there where the dining hall is now. Not where the old church is, but up where the dining hall is. That's the site of the little frame church when I was a kid. And my family were going to church there. And her family was going to church there, even though they lived down near Barnesville. But they had family connections with the Pentecostal movement here and the local in the past. Her grandparents did. So we have a picture. It's in there somewhere. We could probably show you of a group of the people. They were members of the Mountain Gap Church back then, and it was must have been probably about 1938. I was about 5 years old. She's almost a year younger. In other words, just coincidentally, we were standing side by side in this picture.
How about that?
And later, though, her family, they got a church built in Barnesville, very nice church. And so after that, after a short, some period of time after that picture, when they were attending here, they had their own church in Barnesville, and were not a part of this local church. But even then, I knew her. We would see each other at camp meetings and other type things. So that's how it finally came together. She accuses me of being so interested in my studies. In other words, I didn't try to rush things and get a wife before I had finished most of my. I had just about finished my. I got it. I did. We married. I think while I was working on my master's degree. But I told her she didn't hurt. She had some other boyfriends.
What year did y'all get married?
1961.
Wow, so how many years have y'all been married now? How long?
62 years. We were married in June of 61. So we were married 62 years this past June.
Wow, congratulations. That's awesome. So, Mr. James, let's move now to something that I know you're pretty passionate about and I know you know a lot about, and that's the history of Mountain Gap. Have you always attended Mountain Gap Church?
You know, yeah, as far back as I can remember. When I was born, both my parents were attending Finchie Methodist Church in Meansville, just above Meansville there on 109. That's where all my dad's people were from there. And even my mother's people, her parents had her father, my grandfather, on my mother's side, his family had been a part of the Finchie Methodist Church. And of course, when the Holiness Revival came through in this country around 1900, this church that's when it was formed, and largely from people who came out of those churches, out of most of them out of a Methodist church down here. It's no longer active at all on the old Alabama Road. But anyway, long story short, I was born when my parents were still attending the Fancy Methodist Church, but I don't. They my dad got saved, although he said his family members, others, friends thought he was already saved. But he started coming to Mountain Gap to camp meeting, and apparently got under conviction and found out he wasn't saved like he thought he was. So, but my earliest recollection though is them being at Mountain Gap, and with the Mountain Gap camp meeting. So most all of my life we've been, most all that I can recall, is right here at Mountain Gap Church.
When was the first camp meeting, Mountain Gap camp meeting?
Well, I did a study of that. Have you seen that little book that I authored on it?
No, sir.
I'll give you one, but hold it just a second. I'll do it. I'll give you that so I won't.
Perfect.
No, it's I got it inside there. I'll give you. I did a little history of the Mountain Gap camp meeting, and as best we can approximate, there's not any written records much on it. It was the first camp meeting was. It was in about 1900, and it was under a brush arbor. Back then it wasn't a tabernacle like this. For the summer revival, they would establish posts like in a framework and cover it with brush, green leaves brush, and of course it wouldn't last for the next year. All that would
away.
They would die and then it fall away. So the best we can approximate, and I did some research on it back several years ago, was probably the first one was held in a pasture off Vega Road over there. They had not located yet Mountain Gap at that time, and the Allen pasture there, and they continue to have it there. I think each year. In fact, I remember hearing my grandfather and some say that at one point they had a good number of supporters over toward 19 Highway, back over that way. And to accommodate some of them, I think for more than 1 year, they had the camp meeting over there's a little place over there called Smyrna Church, Smyrna Baptist Church, somewhere right in that community they call Smyrna, that I think they had the camp meeting over there, maybe several times. I don't know how many, but anyway, they came back though, and they had to move the church. The church was the Vega Holiness Church. That was the original name of the church when it first founded, and it was established right there at Vega. In fact, the church that was built for that was by that group, and they built their own little church there, is now been converted to a house and people living in it. But the building is still in existence, and they lost it by some unscrupulous handling by a minister who they trusted, and got the property out from among them. That's when they moved here to Mountain Gap. The congregation then, after they lost their church building there, they moved here to Mountain Gap location and started having services like a brush arbor or whatever. They didn't even have a church here then, but they moved here because one of the members, strong supporters of the group, that was his property, the Jones property. He gave him a small piece of, or at least I think they gave him a small piece of a little rental for, not a rental, but payment for it, for an acre of land over there, where the old church was, as the dining hall is now, and started having services there. And it was in 1913 that after the Pentecostal revival had come, and the Pentecostal revival came in this area in 1907, split the church wide open. some of the people wouldn't have Pentecost. They didn't want to identify with that.
Yeah.
So part of the original congregation left. Most of those who were over toward 19 Highway in that area, they have built their own church over there and continued to be non-Pentecostal. They're Nazarene, good people. But anyway, the group that stayed here had accepted the Pentecost, Pentecostal in the Pentecostal revival, and so the PH Church, International Pentecostal Holiness Church, of which we are part now, had just been organized in 1911, and one of the ministers, a Reverend I'll think of it in a minute. Medley, Reverend Medley, came and preached a revival for them here. And apparently it was under a brush arbor or something because they had no building here. Anyway, he, as a representative of the fairly newly formed Pentecostal Holiness Church, he could persuade them to come into the PH Church, since they all believed in Pentecost, had received Pentecost. It was in 1913. He came here and they organized as a Mountain Gap Church under that name. That's when the Mountain Gap name first originated.
What year was that?
1913.
Okay.
1913 under this Reverend Medley, Rob Medley, Medley. And the official records of the conference, Georgia Conference, show them this organization having taken place in 1914. But what happened was they actually did the organization in 1913, but it was not until they had a conference in 1914 that they ratified it, acknowledged it, and so on. But anyway, from 1913, the church has been at this location, Mountain Gap, and with that name, Mountain Gap Church.
Wow. That's a long time.
Before that was from 1930. Before that, it was Vega Holiness Church.
Okay. Wow, that's a really long time that the church has been here. That's amazing that they've been able to survive and I guess adapt to, the modern changes.
For quite a while, they had to hold services in people's homes. It was 1916 before they were able to build the first little frame church there, and was recycled lumber that church that one of the members had pastored before they came Pentecostal even, up above Zebulon. It's called Corinth Church. And my grandfather Brown's brother was a minister. He had pastored that church. So, but it had been discontinued. So I understand in 1916, the people here bought somehow acquired that building and tore it down, brought it, they lumber recycled it, built the first Mountain Gap Church right here. And that was in 1916.
When they built the church.
Yeah. And the first tabernacle for camp meeting was they would continue to have camp meetings under these brush arbors. But the first tabernacle wasn't built until 1919.
And where was that built at?
Right there in the same spot.
So the one that's there now has been...
The one that's there now is just back a little bit further. See, I remember there's been 3 tabernacles there. I remember all of them. I remember the first one. It wasn't torn down until in the 1940s, maybe around the mid-1940s, and built a new one. It might have been closer to 1950. I've got the record somewhere here. I've put it in format at some time. Anyway, they built a new tabernacle. It was still another frame type building, but slightly larger, a little bit larger than the first one. And I remember that one very well. It had rooms on each side of the choir that people could come and camp. And we did. There were a few people that did. Although the water system was the spring down there. And but anyway, that was in sometime in the 40s, late 40s. I think we built the second tabernacle, and it was in the mid 70s, about 30 years later or better. under Brother Coleman, after he'd moved here, he was responsible for getting this particular type of construction. This wood timbers and so on was shipped in here from Michigan or somewhere. I forgot just where. He had all that information and had it, and we had it done. And he was the prime designer and engineer of that building, that tabernacle.
The one built in the 50s?
No, this one is built in the 70s. One that's right now.
One. The current. What happened to the one that was built in the 50s?
Well, it probably needed some repairs and so on. And rather than do that, the camp meeting board decided that they would, particularly under Brother Coleman's advice. He was a member of the board. He pastored the church here for a while, and he was an industrial arts major from high school in Griffin, and I mean not a major. He had taught industrial arts. He got his degree at the University of Georgia.
Okay.
And so he had all the connections and information about that tabernacle design like we've got here, like we have now. So it was decided to just tear the other one down instead of trying to do whatever necessary. For instance, one thing, it was still shavings on the ground. In the floor of the tabernacle.
Wood shavings?
Wood shavings. Yeah, I grew up sometimes playing and sleeping in the shavings. But as I said, the floor was the ground with shavings on it. So one of the advantages and advances is under this one we put a concrete floor in it.
Yeah.
Didn't make it easy for kids to sleep on them though.
No. But it probably makes it hold up longer.
Yeah.
So you said something about at the tabernacle that was built in the 50s that had rooms for people.
Well, it was built.
stay in?
It was not built in the 50s. It was built in the late 40s.
Okay.
I mean, I
40s.
could get the exact date on it,
Uh-huh.
but I didn't do that. I didn't try to do it.
That's fine. But
It was in the late 40s that first tabernacle was torn down, and another one was built.
okay. And I heard that people used to come. It's called camp meeting, and they used to come and camp. Is that right?
Yeah. There used to be some camping facilities. There were several cottages that were there at one time. In fact, the first camp meeting after Carolyn and I married, we came and camped in a little cottage that was out on the ground. Brother Ralph McBroom, who had been the pastor of this church at 3 different times over the years, and he might have been here then probably when we did it. Anyway, he was very instrumental in getting more camping facilities. We had several. We had a workers' cottage, we call it. It has a men's and ladies' bathroom in it, and several bedrooms. It was down slightly, sort of behind the church up there, just a little bit below the church, behind it, and then dotted around in where the manufactured home is there, where the pastor's daughter lives. There were several cottages there. I even had one there. We had a cottage there.
Right there in the woods.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, it's an open space there.
Yeah.
Around that, where that manufactured home is. What was built to be the pastor's home when it was built.
Parsonage. It was built to be a parsonage.
Built to be a parsonage, right.
Okay. And how long did a camp meeting usually last?
Well, when I was a kid and on up for many years, the standard camp meetings, there's several camp meetings around the area. One is they still operate an old Methodist camp meeting out from Griffin, Mount Zion. And they still well, they don't quite adhere to that either, but they did then. And the Indian Springs camp meeting, which still is very active over below Jackson. Most camp meetings, for some reason, would start on Thursday and go through that not only that weekend but the following week, close the following Sunday. And that was the date of this camp meeting for many years. Camp meeting always started on a Thursday evening, and then continued through the weekend and on through the next week to the following Sunday. It was back in the I think it was back when Brother Beecham was the superintendent of the church of the conference. We started shortening it. First shortened it to a full week, embracing the 4th of July. And we found that didn't work too well. At one time it did. The older date was included often, I think included the 4th of July, because people would, back then, there weren't as many places to go. People didn't take off vacations to the beach and stuff like that around the 4th of July. In fact, a lot of the people were employed in the textile mills around, and they would usually give off a whole week around the 4th of July off. So camp meeting was planned around that. But it finally turned out that a lot of those people who had vacations, now they had automobiles, they had more money, they'd rather go to somewhere else than the camp meeting. Mm-hmm. So we changed the camp meeting. First, but with the first shortening of it, though, we didn't change the business about the 4th of July. We went from Sunday to Sunday, always including the 4th. That was the first major change. And then once we saw the effects of the appeal to people of going other places like beaches and so on, we decided to set it up to be completely separated, not connected anyway, to the week that included the 4th of July. So that's what we did. And then after a while, maybe, I don't know, for 2 or 3 years, this was under Brother Beecham too, we reduced it from to not include both Sundays, just the first Sunday and then through Friday. So that's the way it is now.
And when did that change occur to the current days that it is?
Let's see. Well, it's been several years, but probably at least 10 years ago. I mean, I have all that information in my files if I realize that you might need that. But I have the dates when we started. Cut it down from 10 days and then to 6 days.
Mm-hmm. So before we wrap it up, Mr. James, I'm curious to know the namesake of our church, Mountain Gap Church. Where did that name come from?
The location. See, it's located a gap in the mountain.
Okay, so simple as that, just the mountain.
Well, what's interesting, if you read Lizzie Mitchell's history of Pike County, the most authentic history, I think, of the county, because her grandfather was one of the original settlers, and she was an academician, taught school in Zebulon for many years, and she wrote the history of Pike County, and she points out that from the very early days of the formation of this county, there were the people who down in this area below here had to pass through the gap to get to the county seat. In fact, the road's always been through the gap, but used to be lower down. A few years ago, they came in, the highway department did, and extended the width of this road and cut back into the bank toward the mountain that way and so on. But you know where the spring's located down there?
I think so. Is it where the little pond is down there, Brother?
Spring is just a little above toward the road, a little above it toward the road. Well, the original road went almost right beside that spring. I don't remember the days, but if you get it up, go a little further back, you can see where the old railroad cut used to be. And as I said, the railroad then came right through the gap right above there. But so Lizzie Mitchell points out that there were people who, the travelers would come on their way to the county seat to Zebulon from down the lower part of the county here, and they would stop there to get water. It's a Mountain Gap Spring, and so it already had a designation as Mountain Gap.
Hmm.
And in fact, I have a document here somewhere in my files. I know that where this Mary Jones, who was the owner of the property that included that includes where the church is now up there. Doesn't include where it is down here, but the original church was built on, I think I mentioned earlier, about an acre of land that was given there. Well, I think, I've got a copy of a document somewhere where she actually gave the right of way to several trustees to build a courthouse. That's what they used to call them in those days. A place people could, back in the early days, and people lived didn't have automobile transportation and so on, to accommodate the voting and a justice of peace operating to carry out certain minor legal functions. Mm-hmm. They'd build a little buildings. They'd call them a courthouse where people would go to vote. So I've got a copy of this document where Mary Jones gave the right of way to build a courthouse, a building there, right there at Mountain Gap, for people to vote and stuff like that. But in fact, one of my great uncles was one of the trustees that signed it. But I don't think it ever came to fruition. I don't think they ever built one there.
So the Mountain Gap right here, the spring, that was the only source of water for the longest time around here.
Yeah.
Wow.
In fact, even after the camp meeting, many years after camp meeting started, we had begun here. Back I can remember when they didn't have running water from the spring. And I remember when they first put a pump over the spring, and it pumped water up to the dining hall, but not to the church. Church was a little this side of it. Yeah. But then later, I guess maybe by that time we probably had the well drilled out. But when they put bathrooms on the back of the old church there, they're no longer there. They had to remove them, but to extend the church on the back side a little bit. But there used to be two little buildings, little extensions on each on the ground level, on the back side of the old church, one for women and one for men, and it was cold water. You didn't get any warm water. I remember hearing the pastor, this brother Mac Broom, who was then in charge of the camp meeting situation and pastor of the church a lot of the time, tell with real gusto, laughing about some young man who was at the camp meeting and didn't realize when he got in the shower that it was cold water, and how he heard him hollering when the water hit him.
he jumped out of that thing, huh? Yeah. Well, Mr. James, I want to thank you so much for allowing me to do this interview with you. I really enjoyed it, and I definitely learned a lot here today.
Well, I enjoyed recounting some of those things and put them in perspective. It's almost difficult, hard to believe almost that there was no tabernacle, even though I had camp meetings. There was no tabernacle here till 1919.
Yes, sir.
They did it all with these brush arbors in the summer. And the first church building, even though they organized in 1913, they worshiped in houses until 1916, when I think I told you, I'm repeating myself, that they got recycled an old church up above Zebulon and brought it here and built the first little church. I remember I attended, that's what the church I attended when I was small, had a big pot-bellied stove right in the middle of it.
To keep it warm.
Yeah.
Keep it warm. Well,
it could get you hot, too.
I'm sure it did. Well, I want to thank you for keeping a detailed history and all the time you've spent in research for the history of Mountain Gap, so it's not forgotten.
Well, if it would help, I know we've finished this narrative of the thing. I can give you the more specific dates of when the first tabernacle was gave way to the second one. I know when the first one was built, 1919. Sometime in the 40s, they built the second one. And then sometime in the 70s, they built one that's there now. But as I said, I could find, I have that information. I could give it to you if you thought it would be useful.
Okay. Yes, sir. Well, thank you so much for doing this, Mr. James. I really appreciate
Okay,
it.
I appreciate it, Levi. But I'm really glad you're interested in that.
Yes, sir.
I think too many of the young people these days are not interested in history of where they came from, where situations like this.
I think it's important though that I like history anyways, but I think it's important that we keep up with it and keep up with our past so we remember where we came from and stuff. And I enjoy hearing all these stories of you growing up because I think it's interesting how much simpler life was back then, the simpler way of living.
Nobody would guess in our church today that we started out as a bigger holiness church.
No, I never knew that.
And that continued till this 1913, and they were presumably founded, or the church, not the camp meeting, was actually thought to be founded about 1898, a couple of years before the camp meeting was.
How about that?
Although this is approximations, nobody had kept any written records. But in talking to some of the oldsters, my grandparents and others, I went out and interviewed some people that were still around that could remember some of this stuff years ago. That we, didn't become Mountain Gap Church until we came to this location. The church had already been in existence about 15 years over here over at Vega. But part of that time, as I said, had to meet in homes.
Huh. Wow. My, how times have changed.
They have, really.
If you found any value whatsoever in today's episode or any of our previous ones, head on over to YouTube and subscribe. Once you're done there, go to wherever you listen from. So this could be Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, or YouTube Music. Follow the show there. And if you're feeling extra generous, give it a 5-star review. All of this collectively ensures that more people will hear the show. So thank you, and we'll see you next week.